Hey, 42 here. During the Cold War, the United States launched a series of satellites into orbit around Earth called the Vela satellites. They had one job, and one job only, to detect the distinctive double flash of a nuclear explosion, a unique signature given off when a nuclear weapon is detonated in the atmosphere. 12 of these highly specialized Vela satellites were launched between 1963 and 1970, which seems a little excessive, but they were essentially orbiting policemen, enforcing the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, signed by the US, UK, and Soviet Union in 1963. It placed a ban on nuclear weapon tests underwater, in Earth's atmosphere, and in outer space. So, if one of these Vela satellites detected a nuclear weapons test anywhere in the world, then America would know about it within minutes and would America the holy shite out of the perpetrator. Or at least that was the theory. And then, it happened. On the 22nd of September 1979, the Vela 6911 satellite detected the unmistakable double flash on its sensors. Someone had just detonated a nuclear test in the ocean between Africa and Antarctica. The only problem was, nobody should have been testing a nuclear device in Earth's atmosphere, and the United States had no idea who this someone was. Or did they? This is the mysterious and controversial story of the Vela double flash incident. And now, a quick ad from Adoo. Adoo is an all-in-one management software that provides entrepreneurs with a range of applications to simplify the day-to-day management of their business. I've always used a bunch of different business applications that are all really pricey individually, so having them all under one roof with Adoo is a game changer for me. And the great thing about Adoo is that the first app is free for life, including hosting and support, such as the Adoo invoicing app that I've been using for free. Invoicing is probably the most frustrating part of running a business, so it helps when you have a beautiful, easy-to-use software that helps you with it. And Adoo provides that. It allows you to create an unlimited number of professional invoices instantly, as well as track payments and automatically follow up with late payments. Adoo easily records your expenses and transactions, and even uses an AI that recognizes supplier invoice data. You can even sync your bank accounts for real-time tracking. Getting on top of your finances is super easy with Adoo. Click the link in the description to try out Adoo for yourself now. Now, to understand why this illegal nuclear test was so strange and so suspicious, let's explore the context. Since the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963, there had not been a single violation, except for a few countries that didn't sign it, but all those tests were known about in advance. Signing nations were still allowed to conduct underground tests, they just weren't permitted to explode their atom bombs in the atmosphere, water, or outer space.
The remains of these colored columns will be excavated, the dimensions of the true crater established, and the zone of rupture defined.
The reasoning behind this international law was to limit the nuclear fallout that was being emitted into the environment by these tests. And that's definitely a good thing. I think we can all agree. America had spent millions of dollars putting specialized satellites into space to detect any breaches of the Test Ban Treaty. So it's fair to say that doing such a test would be a pretty serious breach of international peace. It would also have risked escalating global tensions that were already fraught into a potential nuclear war.
Has decided to transform Cuba into a base for communist aggression, for putting all of the Americas under the nuclear gun.
What I'm trying to say is that whichever nation did this test would have needed a pair of cojones so colossal, they would have blocked out the sun. So, which nation was it? Well, the location of the explosion gives us a clue. The double flash signature was detected by the Vela satellite at 53 minutes past midnight. Within minutes, it triggered an alarm back in the Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. They downloaded the data from the satellite and graphed it, and this, which has only recently been declassified, was the result. Each of those humps represents a sudden and very bright flash of light within Earth's atmosphere. These two humps together, in short succession, are the telltale sign of a nuclear blast. The staff on duty in the Air Force Base instantly knew what this meant, and they escalated it. After examining more data from other listening posts and satellites, as well as using a bit of triangulation, the Americans were able to calculate the rough coordinates of the blast. 47 degrees south, 40 degrees east. That places it in the Indian Ocean, neatly between the Crozet Islands, owned by France, and the Prince Edward Islands, owned by South Africa. There is our first clue. Jimmy Carter was president at the time, and we now know that he noted in his diary that the nuclear test might have been detonated from a ship, which means we're looking at France or South Africa as prime suspects. Of course, this is all circumstantial for now, but don't worry, there are a few more clues we can unpick. But before we explore that, you probably have a small doubt in your mind, because even the best sensors are not infallible. What if the most simple answer to all of this is that the Vela satellite got it wrong? What if that so-called double flash wasn't caused by an atmospheric nuclear test at all? Well, that's certainly a possibility, but here's why it's extremely unlikely. The Vela 6911 satellite was equipped with two optical sensors, with the most fabulous name, bang meters. I shit you not. Bang meters are optical radiometers that are highly attuned and have one job and one job only: to detect radiant energy, particularly light. And it's a job that they do exceedingly well. When a nuclear bomb explodes, it produces an extremely intense flash of light. Then, the resultant fireball cools down a little and produces a secondary flash of light that lasts a little longer, up to 30 milliseconds. Both of these light emissions are much, much brighter than most known natural phenomena that can occur in Earth's atmosphere. Even a super bolt, a rare and extremely powerful bolt of lightning, couldn't be mistaken for a nuclear flash. During the entire lifetime of the Vela program, none of the 12 satellites had recorded a single false positive. Well, actually, that's not quite true. They had detected a few zoo events, which are glints of light that come off micrometeoroids, but these are very easily separable from real double flash nuclear signals after the event. Prior to the 1979 incident, 41 double flashes were detected by Vela satellites, and all 41 of those turned out to have been nuclear tests. Add on the fact that the Vela 6911 satellite was also equipped with gamma ray, X-ray and neutron detectors, all of which lit up after the suspected 1979 nuclear incident like a Christmas tree, and it's fair to say that if this satellite says there was a nuclear test, then you should probably damn well believe it. By the way, all 41 of those atmospheric tests previously detected by Vela were conducted by France or China, neither of which had signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty. So technically they weren't illegal. France, however, always pre-warned the US about the timing and location of their tests.
France in 1966 and the People's Republic of China in 1967.
China, of course, did no such thing. But it didn't matter. The US was spying so heavily on China that it could detect the activity leading up to a test, and so they always knew when one was going to take place anyway. What was so concerning about the double flash detected in 1979 was that it was in a totally unexpected location, and the US had no idea who was behind it, and that was of grave concern. Who was it then? Well, for a start, we can rule France out of the running with close to absolute certainty. France already had a legal, well-instrumented test range at the Mururoa Atoll, where it had done all of its nuclear tests in deep underground shafts since 1975.
The French insisted there would be no danger of radiation increase.
Also, US maritime surveillance had detected no French naval traffic around the Crozet or Prince Edward Island groups in the days and weeks before the blast. At least no detections that they made public. The Mururoa Atoll is also 7,000 miles away from the French-owned Crozet Islands, so there would have been no practical reason to conduct a test so far away from their existing setup. We now know that what the US had noted, however, were South African ships in the area. But that's not exactly a smoking gun, because those noted naval movements were perfectly routine. South Africa regularly surveyed and serviced the Prince Edward Islands. Obviously, South Africa having ships in its own backyard doesn't suddenly make it Dr. Evil. But they did have a couple of rather compelling incentives to want to test a nuclear device. In 1979, the apartheid government in Pretoria was fighting a war against Angola, and 36,000 Cuban troops who had intervened on Angola's side were dug in just north of the Namibian border. South Africa was terrified that they could push south at any moment. So, successfully testing a nuclear weapon and then rubbing that fact in Cuba's face would have been a not-so-subtle way of saying, take one more step south and see what happens. Then there's the fact that South Africa had been itching to test nuclear weapons before and had already had a slap on the wrist from the US because of it. Only 2 years earlier, the CIA had caught South Africa with their pants down inside a giant hole. They had been secretly digging a giant shaft in the Kalahari Desert for nuclear tests. But President Carter complained about it and the drilling was stopped. Since that was South Africa's only viable location for a legal underground nuclear testing site, this may have forced them to look further south and attempt to secretly test their weapons in the atmosphere of one of the most remote patches of ocean on the planet. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's it, case closed. South Africa had the means and the motive for a secret nuclear test. But what if I told you that at that time, South Africa had a secret friend, and it might have been a case of, these nuclear weapons aren't mine, oh no, I'm just holding them for a friend, and that friend was Israel. You see, in the 1970s, much like today, Israel was surrounded by incredibly hostile nations. It has always been a lone wolf in a sea of enemies who would, for the most part, love nothing more than to wipe it off the map. Whereas countries like the USA and Russia are frequently and proudly proclaiming to the world that they have a nuclear deterrent, Israel has historically adopted a rather different strategy. They maintain what's called nuclear ambiguity, which essentially boils down to other nations asking, hey, Israel, do you have any nuclear weapons? To which they reply, I know nothing about the horse. In other words, they are constantly in a state of Schrodinger's atomic bomb, neither publicly denying or accepting that they have or wish to have nuclear weapons. Obviously, this puts Israel in a rather difficult situation when it comes to testing their weapons. Unlike the US or France, who will somewhat publicly announce their tests, Israel has to test in secret. Otherwise, the state of their Schrodinger's nuclear arsenal is revealed to the world. And it just so happened that they had a very strong and secretive alliance with a certain South Africa. This unusual alliance was actually quite fitting. Both nations were outcasts on the global stage, South Africa with its apartheid regime and Israel for its constant conflict with their neighbours. Both nations were also secretly trying to develop nuclear weapons. Therefore, it was kismet that they should have teamed up. Oh, I should also mention that each nation had something the other really needed for progressing their secretive bomb programs. South Africa had the raw ingredients, namely large uranium reserves, and they had been enriching yellow cake uranium since the mid-70s. But they didn't have the technical know-how for turning all that lovely radioactive material into highly sophisticated nuclear weapons. Israel, on the other hand, possessed that know-how. Although never confirmed, the US suspected that Israel had built highly effective, functional nuclear weapons by 1979. But they didn't have, you guessed it, the raw materials needed to scale up their operations. They required uranium, and oh, look at that! South Africa had enough yellow cake to open a nuclear bakery. So, Israel would have wanted to do a secret test to validate their nuclear designs and ensure they would actually work on the battlefield if one of their many hostile neighbours ever got a bit too aggressive. And South Africa, which also had designs on building its own nuclear arsenal, could have supplied Israel with the raw materials and gotten test data and other scientific knowledge from them in return. South Africa could even provide the venue for the test, the waters surrounding the Prince Edward Islands. Obviously, all of this is highly circumstantial, and one should be careful when pointing fingers in the dark. So let's shine a light on some more tangible details. To start with, during the dates of the 17th to the 23rd of September, the Simonstown Harbour and Naval Base in South Africa were declared to be off-limits to the public, which is awfully convenient considering it was the 22nd when Vela detected the supposed nuclear test. Oh, and the South African Naval Rescue Unit was also suspiciously placed on high alert between the 21st and 23rd. The next evidence comes from top-secret apartheid-era documents, declassified in 2010. They reveal that Israel met with and agreed to sell nuclear weapons to South Africa in 1975. They even signed a classified agreement, codenamed Segment, that bound the two nations into a military and nuclear alliance. And then there's the most damning evidence we have to date. Commodore Dieter Gerhardt was a convicted Soviet spy who was the commander of the Simonstown Naval Base at the time of the Vela incident. In 1994, he was released from prison, and upon his release, he said, "Although I was not directly involved in planning or carrying out the operation, I learned unofficially that the flash was produced by an Israeli-South African test, codenamed Operation Phoenix. The explosion was clean and was not supposed to be detected, but they were not as smart as they thought, and the weather changed, so the Americans were able to pick it up." Sounds pretty damning, but once again we shouldn't point fingers in the dark, and I must make you aware that the original source of this quote has been either lost to history or purposely misplaced. However, with all of this evidence stacking up, back in the US, the Carter administration formed an investigatory body consisting of 8 leading scientists named the Runa Panel, after its chief, MIT electrical engineer Jack Runa. You would think that the point of such a panel would be to find out which nation or nations did the nuclear test. But there were some aspects of this panel and how it was directed by government higher-ups that have since led to huge controversy. You see, from the get-go, the panel had one simple, yet oddly restrictive mandate: to determine if the mysterious double flash could have been a natural phenomenon, rather than a sneaky nuclear explosion. In other words, they weren't tasked to find out who did it, or even if someone did it at all, just whether it's at all possible that Mother Nature might have done an uncanny impression of a nuclear blast and fooled the sensors. What's more, the panel was explicitly barred from seeing any intelligence that would have pointed towards a particular culprit, other than Mother Nature. This meant that no matter how thorough their investigation, the Runa Panel would be flying partially blind. They never got access to crucial classified evidence, like the hydroacoustic recordings made by secret US Navy microphones. Recordings that later suggested a nuclear blast had indeed occurred near the ocean surface around the Prince Edward Islands. And, sure enough, when the panel released its final report in 1980, it was, well, let's just say it was a bit odd. The Runa Panel concluded that the Vela double flash incident was probably not from a nuclear explosion, and that it was likely a technological anomaly caused by a tiny meteorite hitting the Vela 6911 satellite. Remember that the bang meters on these Vela satellites had correctly identified 41 confirmed nuclear tests, and there were several other pieces of supporting evidence, such as the aforementioned hydroacoustic recordings, gamma ray and neutron signals that were detected simultaneously by other instruments on the same satellite and were consistent with a nuclear explosion, and atmospheric analysis conducted in the days after the event revealed trace amounts of iodine-131, a radioactive isotope commonly produced by nuclear detonations. To put it bluntly, the fact that the Runa Panel basically said, "What nuclear explosion? I didn't see a nuclear explosion, did you?" is a bit bloody suspicious. In the end, the Vela double flash incident remains officially unresolved, an enigma deliberately wrapped in ambiguity, denial, and political convenience. For example, it's rather convenient that key studies, particularly those done by the CIA in the days and weeks following the incident, have still not been declassified. Was it a technical glitch, an accidental collision with a meteorite, or something far more sinister and calculated? The official conclusion by the Runa Panel seems questionable at best. But the Runa Panel was set up from the very beginning to reach an ambiguous conclusion, It was packed full of scientists who are skeptical by nature and are bound by their profession not to make conclusions without sufficient evidence. Evidence that was purposely withheld. It's blindingly obvious to anyone why the US wouldn't want to publicly implicate Israel and South Africa in an illegal nuclear detonation. They may have had their road bumps along the way, but both nations have long been close allies with the US on matters of national security, intelligence, and military cooperation, especially so in recent decades. In this world of geopolitics, the rules often follow those that we set down in the playground as children. You don't grass on your friends. And personally, I find that equal parts comforting and terrifying. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.